bad.
What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Varendes, also known as Ricky Varendes, and I have a great episode for you. It's a little late, but better late than never. This is I don't know what to tell you, because what we have today is an anonymous whistleblower, a healthcare whistleblower, and she shares her story, and I don't want to, or I shouldn't say I don't want to, because I want to, but I can't get into how we got connected and who our mutual friend is, but we have a mutual friend who suggested her coming on the show to share her story, and probably in time you'll eventually find out who she is, because she's working on a book, which she mentions on the podcast, or at least I think she mentioned being suggested to write a book. So I think that's something that's probably in the future for her. And her story's, it's pretty crazy. I mean, we go into some of the history of how she got into her field of work and all that stuff, and then also some of the trauma she's dealt with because of the stuff she's seen and has dealt with. And it's interesting. It's a very interesting conversation. Hopefully not too depressing. I feel like these conversations are important, but something that I'm always conscious of is being worried that the conversations are too depressing or too sad. But I'm assuming the listeners of this show are probably very similar to me, where you don't really think about if the conversation's depressing or sad, but you think about if the conversation's important and if you get something from it. And not just information, because I know a lot of these conversations I have with guests, I hope that you can get some information and learn something new, but also you learn about the person's experiences and perspectives, and you get an insight into somebody else's life, which I think is always important and fun and crucial. And I think that's the power of conversation. You can talk to somebody and learn through their experiences. And I forget how the quote is. It's like a smart person learns from their mistakes. A smarter person learns from other people's mistakes. And I think there's a lot to that. So hopefully you guys really enjoy this conversation. I wish I could tell you a little more about her, but we get pretty deep into some of her personal life and some of her personal experiences, which I was a little worried about because the goal was for her to stay anonymous. But we got so much into some of our personal experiences and life experiences and stuff that I'm like, you know what? Hopefully we're not giving out too much information about her, where it's too easy to figure out who she is. But let's hope we didn't do that. And let's hope anybody who can get her in trouble isn't listening to the podcast. Regardless, it was, like I said, it was a great conversation. I hope you guys really enjoy it. I really have a soft spot for whistleblowers. I've had people like Abraham Bolden on, who was the JFK whistleblower. He was the first black Secret Service agent on a presidential detail. People like John Kiriakou and Michael Suzanne and so many different types of whistleblowers that I think do this courageous thing of putting morals and doing what's right way beyond everything else. It's more important than personal gain. It's more important than, in many cases, personal safety. And I think I have such respect for them, because I like to believe I would do the same. But if I truly believed my life was in danger or could be ruined, would I do the same? You know, it's those internal questions where, like, if I'm being honest, would I risk everything I had? Thomas Drake went through a divorce after being a NSA whistleblower. He tells his story on the podcast. When you hear stories like that, and you lose your job, you lose your marriage, you lose your family, because of all the just stress, anxiety, and pressure, and financial stress and anxiety, emotional stress and anxiety, all that stuff. To be completely honest, I'd like to believe I would do the right thing, because guilt has always been a friend of mine. It's always been the reason why I do the right thing, or why I eat right, or I exercise, or I reevaluate how I acted or responded in a certain interaction with somebody, because I feel guilty. Guilt makes me feel like, okay, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I could have handled it differently. And it forces me to improve on that. So, but anyways, I guess I'm just going on a long rant. I guess you guys probably know what I'm talking about and what I'm trying to say. But we'll get right into the conversation. Obviously, real quickly, I want to just remind you guys, please share these conversations. I have a Patreon page, but if you can't support the show financially, and everybody who has, I truly appreciate it. And thank you so much for doing so. I can't thank you guys enough, because I know money's tight for many of us, and it's, even something as simple as a couple bucks or $5 a month. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it's appreciated, and every bit helps. It helps with storage and bandwidth and all that stuff. And honestly, I'm not even making enough money to cover all the storage and bandwidth, but it's helping, and I think that that's important. It's a step in the right direction. With that said, also remember, all the music you hear in the podcast in the beginning and at the end and after this intro, all that music is my solo project called Theory 6. You can get that music anywhere you get digital downloads, and all that money goes to supporting the podcast. Also on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, or just look up the Ripple Effect Podcast. You'll find our YouTube channel. We have video versions of all our episodes. In the show description, we have links to the guests and their work. In this case, there will be no links to the guest because, like I said, she's an anonymous healthcare whistleblower. And I think that's it for now. I have a bunch of guests that I'm kind of fudging around and trying to figure out a schedule that works. If you guys are a Patreon supporter, one thing that I started doing for the Patreon supporters is kind of letting you guys know about that type of stuff. The last show, the OKC bombing special, my Patreon supporters knew when it was booked and who was going to be on and all that stuff. And they also know which guests I'm referring to that hopefully will be on the show soon also. So anytime I get any information on, I book a guest, or I'm in the process of negotiating a time and date and all that stuff, I try to just keep you guys in the loop. If you're a Patreon supporter, it's the least I can do is give you some of that inside information that hopefully makes it worthwhile. And I also think it's fun because most podcasters, like I've told you in the past, they don't really tell you who's going to be on until the last second. So to kind of know weeks in advance, or sometimes maybe even months in advance, I think will be pretty cool. So that's it. Finally, the intro's over. Enjoy the show, guys, and enjoy the conversation. Peace.
Okay, well, I feel like a good place to start is just that I will tell you one of the stories that most disturbed me. This is the story that launched me into the field of consulting. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. I'll just give you a little story. And just so you know, I'm reading from actual lab reports. And I'm going to give you more information than what could ever possibly be put into a podcast. But it'll give you a little idea of what's happened in the life I've lived. And I'll try and tell it. And so FFO told me to always speak in terms that could be understood by an 8-year-old. And I used way too big of words with him. So I'll try and go in a better vein this time.
Yeah, simplify it.
Sure. Okay, so what I'm looking at right now is a university medical center that is in Chicago.
So for the record,
it says,
I am recording, and this part of the conversation you want me to use for the interview and the podcast?
Sure.
Okay.
If you find it interesting enough, which I think you will.
We might as well, yeah. We'll start off right now. We'll get right into it, and you can share this personal story, and we'll go from there. Go where the conversation takes us.
Okay. So I'm looking at a form, and of course it says at the top confidential, but it also says advanced heart failure, cardiac transplant, and mechanical circulatory support program The agenda is an urgent meeting, and it's Tuesday, March 27th, 2012 at 8:15 a.m. So on this list, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 patients. These are all patients who are being worked up for a heart transplant. One of the 1, 2, 3, 12 columns that I look at, it has something called the PRA, the unacceptable antigens. And if you think about heart transplants, there are several measures that have to be met before you can actually be listed on the United States Universal Organ Sharing Donation System. So one of those is the blood type you have. And when you have a blood type, sometimes after you have a child or have a blood transfusion, there are cross matches that happen in your bloodstream, and you can form antigens. So best case scenario, if you're going to have surgery and they do a type and screen, the screen shows that you have no antigens on your blood screen. But if you do have antigens on your blood, they have to then do a cross match, so that in the event that you would need blood, they have blood that they can give to you that your body will not reject and will not cause you to have further trauma. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So I'm looking at one of the patients, and her class is 96%, class 2 is 99%, and I'm counting now. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's just go ahead and say she has greater than 30 unacceptable antigens. So even though they could find a donor or I'm trying to think of a more sensitive way to say that, but when a loved one or patient expires, there's a chance that their organs will be donated. And that's a good thing. That can mean that others can live in the face of tragedy. It oftentimes helps family members to know that their loved one is going to be donating organs to someone who is so sick that they may die. And in this case, there are a list here of 14 patients who need a heart transplant. And so they're divided up into how sick they are now and whether or not they have unacceptable antigens that will mean that they would likely reject the heart. So they also look at your blood type and your body size. And all of these measures are entered into the United Network Organ Sharing System, and it's a database, right? Just like all other databases. So in order to qualify for a heart transplant, you go through lots of tests. They make sure that if you were to receive this heart, you would also be able to take care of it. You have the social support system that would allow you to flourish. You have the way to get to the doctor. You still have lots of tests after you receive the heart transplant. But of most important measure is how well is it a match? How well does this organ that is going to be transplanted match with the recipient? Okay, so this urgent meeting was called because while I was a heart transplant coordinator at this organization, I had been asked to check to confirm unacceptable antigens in the UNOS database system. And this email that I have printed out now talks about the laboratory supervisor saying that there was one error with one patient and someone else wasn't updated. So she went in and updated everyone. She asked for someone to double check everyone. Thanks and have a nice weekend. Well, unfortunately, what I found as I was checking over some of these individuals is that the databases didn't match up. The information for unacceptable antigens had some that were more, some that were less, and some that were just completely missing. I had to design a system very quickly to help track which unacceptable antigens were missing from this list. So you have a list, and it's your transplant list, and on it you need to maintain all the unacceptable antigens, date of birth, weight, CMV status, their pulmonary artery pressure, their wedge pressure, and the date of their listing. All these things are very important to whether or not when you get a phone call if the patient would be the right candidate for a transplanted organ. Now remember, the person who's receiving that organ is one person. But if somehow in the mix a donor organ went to a patient who was not the right person to receive it, you've now caused 2 deaths, right? So you have the death of the patient that donated the organ, and then if you've sent it to the wrong recipient, you likely would cause a death in the recipient. Plus, there's one other person, which is the rightful owner of that organ, who didn't receive it in the first place. And so, days later, I said to all, the only way I think this makes any sense is to color code this stuff. So red is listed in UNOS, not in EPIC. Blue is listed in EPIC, but not in UNOS. Plus, I had questions of whether or not we list alleles. I have 1, 2, 3 patients, and I had to color code it to make sense. Because there were unacceptable antigens that were not listed in the Universal Network Organ Sharing Database. There were unacceptable antigens that were not listed in EPIC, which is the electronic medical record. And then there were versions of that. So what I found was, and I'm laughing because it was so disturbing, we did not have the correct information about the unacceptable antigens for 30% of the heart transplant patients who were listed ready for transplant at a large medical center in Chicago. This was problematic because the heart transplant program had been shut down for 4 years. And when it was restarted, the first 2 people that they transplanted expired within 24 hours. So I received a phone call from a doctor who said, I need you to come over here and help me find out what happened. So if I'm not saying that correctly, what I'm trying to say is, because of an electronic medical record that had errors in it, 2 patients received the wrong heart. They died, and the person who could have received it likely expired as well. And this is all because I used something I call elbow grease. I went to the lab. I asked them to show me their system. What I found was their system printed out a receipt, and the individual who took the receipt went and typed with their own fingers into 2 different databases with no backup watching them to make sure that they entered it correctly. And no one was checking behind them. So 2 patients received the wrong heart at a large hospital system in Chicago. And that was the reason why we had the urgent meeting on Tuesday, March 27th.
So is it just basically just crappy, just a crappy way of going about this? I mean, was it just, I mean, how common is just not being so careful with the information and making sure everything is done correctly, especially when you're talking about possibly making a mistake that could cost lives? I mean, is this just because people just don't care enough to put in the extra work to make sure everything's done correctly, or is the whole system broken? Like, to me, it kind of boggles my mind that something as important as what you're talking about that
was bungled.
Yeah, I mean, is that just because? I mean, what causes that? Is it?
I don't know. I know that as I've marched through my life, so I've been a nurse since 1993, and I've not gone 1 year without finding the exact same type of gross negligence resulting in patient death or, horrific loss of life, loss of ability to live. It's it's truly disturbing, but it seems to follow me throughout my life. So I either think the individuals who are in healthcare don't have the system support they need to be able to be proficient, or more likely, I think at a high level, there's some amount of risk stratification where risk management departments write it off and say, well, that's only 5% of our patient population. But I think it may be more like 25% if I'm being honest.
Well, the thing that kind of it seems kind of interesting, and I mean, I'm just kind of unsure of it. Wouldn't it seems like just putting a little bit more effort in making sure the information's correct could save them some money? Because I mean, like we spoke about a little bit before we started recording. I mean, it's a for-profit industry, and because it's a for-profit industry, wouldn't it make sense for them to maybe be more, I mean, for lack of a better word, be more anal about this specific information and really making sure that everything is inputted correctly, because it could.
Hang on.
Yeah.
I think I left out the best part. So the best part is this laboratory supervisor that I came and observed. I asked her, I said, can you just go ahead and re-enter the information now that we know that on these 3 patients, the information was entered incorrectly? She said, sure. And she and another person watched and re-entered it. And guess what?
What happened?
It was still wrong. Still wrong.
So, okay. So I don't get it. So they're inputting the information and it's wrong. Why? Because they're just typing it in wrong?
Because of human error. Human error.
So,
and that's what people have pitched these complex electronic health systems, saying that they will eliminate the error, but that's not what happens. This occurred in 2012. So fast forward, I became a consultant. I went off. I became, very. We'll just say I have raw talent where it comes to implementing these electronic medical record systems, the software, the hardware. I got my master's. I probably devoted too much time, but I did it in the sake of safe patient care. And also, part of the patients that I treat are the doctors who don't understand what they're using. When a doctor feels like they don't understand how to take care of their patient, they become a patient. So I wrote a thesis on the provider as the secondary patient. Oftentimes, I had to support the provider while he was learning how to care for the patient. But these health systems, they're supposed to have better ways of preventing medical errors, right? Here's the problem. Let's say you're going to Publix, or I don't know, what's your favorite grocery store?
I don't know, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's.
Okay, let's say you go to Whole Foods, right? And you're going to get your favorite brand of cereal, okay? And you pick up cereal and you bring it home, and guess what? When you open your cereal box, it's not that it has no cereal in there. What it has in there is maybe pasta. Now, I know that sounds strange, but that's what's happening in healthcare systems that are trying to convert to electronic systems, or trying to convert their electronic systems to other electronic systems. They're supposed to be doing all these rounds of testing, integrated testing, parallel revenue cycle testing. They're supposed to be doing beta testing. But what they're not finding are the tests that are not mapped correctly. So in one system, it looks like you're ordering a chest x-ray, but in another system, that it's not going to go anywhere. This important order for a chest x-ray is going to go nowhere. And that's why I say it's kind of like you go to the grocery store and you pull a box off of a shelf that you've always been acquainted with. And in this scenario, what would have happened is on the back end, the person who was dropping off the cereal at the grocery store didn't realize that they had the wrong product going into the box. And the grocery store was selling it as if it was still a bowl, a box of cereal. But this isn't food we're talking about here. We're talking about valuable medical tests that if they don't go to the right department, your patient could die. And that's what's happened more often than not.
Yeah, see, this is it just to me it just seems like, I mean,
how can this be happening, right?
Yeah, it's kind of boggling my mind, because I'm at the point where, just like I said, there's so much that, I mean, you have lives on the line. Obviously, you have in some cases money on the line because you're going to get sued by their families. But I mean, I think the thing that kind of works in the benefit of the healthcare system, the doctors, the hospitals, is that a lot of times if something happens to a person, you just kind of assume that, like, oh, okay, it wasn't anybody's fault. It wasn't because they messed up, or there wasn't some attention to detail that they missed. it just stuff happens. Because I mean, it seems like, they always tell you about the risks. If you're going to have some surgery, or if you're taking some medication, there's always risks. There's always risks. There's
Well, okay, so there's two different kinds of risk, right? There's operative consent, and that means I'm doing this operation on you, and this is an operation that you need, right? That's your operative consent. But then there's a second kind of consent, and Joint Commission and all the big, government agencies have really hammered down on doctors and hospitals of this, and that's called your informed consent. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but every doctor who talks to you about having a surgery should then talk to you about what your informed risk is. When that doctor performs that surgery, it is your job as a healthcare consumer to ask the doctor, how many times do you have a bad outcome in this surgery? And not how many times in the nation, not the national average, although it's okay to get the national average and then compare your doctor's average to it. It's every person. So it's the equivalent of taking your car to get it fixed and not knowing who you're taking it to. It's important. The government has assured us that if the doctor receives money from the Centers of Medicaid and Medicare services, their infection rates and their reoperation rates and all the other rates that are important for people to look at, they're posted on the CMS website. I just don't know if people understand that that's an option for them.
Well, the car thing is an interesting example, because I've talked to people about kind of using a car as getting your car repaired as a similar metaphor. But I mean, I've talked about it in the case of how we go into so much of the surgeries and so many things that we go into, and we just kind of take the doctor's word for it, and we kind of are we're blind. We don't really know what's going on or what they're doing or whatnot, and we're like, okay, the doctor said we should do this, or this is the right road to go down, and I should do this or I should do that. And it's like a mechanic fixing your car. I mean, he might fix one thing, and in the process he might accidentally break a bolt or damage something else. And if you say, hey, didn't you break that while fixing this? And be like, no, that was just that wasn't me. That was whatever. I mean, it's same thing with like surgeries. I mean, I wonder if we're talking about having a lack of attention to detail. I mean, there's a lot of things.
How traceable is that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, for example, like if a surgeon's doing a surgery and he accidentally does something else that could, I guess, in the future cause some issue, and then you go back and say, hey, is there a link between my surgery and this pain I have or that or whatever? They just be like, they could easily just say, no, there's no link. And then you just take their word for it, because we're all in the dark. We just assume the doctor's going to tell us the truth, and we put him on this pedestal, and we just assume that, if he's saying there's no link, there's no link. And this goes back to what we talked about before recording. I think people should really question everything, and especially if somebody has some agenda in regards to, one, not being at fault, or two, not wanting to be sued or whatnot. And I mean, is this kind of just me being conspiratorial and thinking that stuff?
No. So link it all together. So here's what I know now. And I didn't know this before until I got up into the higher positions. So let's say the doctor knows that the person needs, I don't know, a gallbladder, right? They need their gallbladder removed. And during the course of removing their gallbladder, they clip the hepatic artery, and all of a sudden the patient needs a liver transplant. That's a real example. A patient goes to a community hospital and they need their gallbladder removed, and the doctor erroneously clips the hepatic artery. That is a known risk of having gallbladder surgery. Probably doesn't happen very often, but it could happen. You would literally be signing off on that when you agree to have your gallbladder out. Now, does the patient ever really think that? So what I'm telling you is, I've had patients arrive at a medical center after having a gallbladder surgery, and we had to list them for a liver transplant emergently. And we do it. We put a new liver in that patient. But if I were a consumer, would I be able to say, so that's where you want to understand what your doctor's complication rate is before you agree to have the surgery. Now, if you've come into a community medical center and you're sick on death's doorstep and you need your gallbladder out, it is truly disturbing to think about what could happen if the knife falls at the wrong time. But beyond that I would say falls into a matter of do no harm. And doctors are protected in that. So they're trying to do it. A lot of times if the patient is sick as all get out, they're not going to have, you only really can work with what you start with. But if you have a perfectly healthy patient and they come in for, say, a mitral valve repair, and in the middle of it, the aortic valve is destroyed, these electronic medical records now, they will tell you what the patient was consented for prior to going into surgery. And on the back end, if the patient was supposed to have one surgery and ends up having 5 surgeries, that should be ringing the bell to someone that some sort of fraudulent or negligent behavior has gone on. And I'm not saying we don't have that happen. I mean, there are plenty of doctors who get sued. But a lot of times that's a fraudulent case anyway. The patient is, seeking money when they shouldn't be. But yes, there are a lot of doctors out there who maybe need to be taken aside. And there are cases that are in the news right now. There's one that was a neurosurgeon from Memphis who had very bad outcomes, and he moved to Dallas. He's now been put in jail. He'll never practice again, but he did harm, I think in the number, like maybe in the 30s, some dead and some maimed, paralyzed.
Well, the other thing too is how unhealthy doctors are and surgeons. I mean, it's funny growing up. I'm a Portuguese immigrant. I came to America, and like you're always told as a kid, like, yo, get a good job, become a doctor, become a lawyer. And then as you get older, you're like, wow, those jobs seem like they suck because they don't get enough sleep. Their job completely consumes their lives. They have no time to do anything else, no energy to do anything else. I know when I had my kids, or when my wife had our kids, our doctor was taking naps between contractions. She was so tired and just overworked, was working like a double. It's like, are these the people I want to make, just really, really important decisions if something goes wrong? Or, just cognitively, are they all there? Are they?
So talk again. So think again. So the systems is what we're talking about. I don't know what's happened, but I think what's happened is the motivation for profit has driven us to have really poor systems in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if people understand this. Some of the articles I read today say that the software vendor said that it was the doctor's fault, and the doctor said it was the software vendor's fault. But one of the things that I know now, after having worked in several software vendors' worlds, is there's a timestamp, and I'm able to prove exactly when whatever happened. Part of the time I find that it was the doctor. Some of the time I find that it was the software that wasn't built correctly or wasn't tested correctly. And I just feel like we should all be able to be open and honest about this, transparent, so that we can build better systems in healthcare. That's my ultimate goal to whistleblow.
Well, even the prices, right? I mean, everything's kind of like made up as they go, because you go from one there was an article some years ago that was really interesting, and they talked about how they went to a bunch of different hospitals, and I actually think it was around where I live. It was around the New England area. And they went to a bunch of hospitals, and for the same surgeries, the same procedures, completely different prices, and they ranged, vastly. And they were trying to figure out like why, and they realized that these numbers were kind of made up. And
right,
if
it's
anybody,
it's the CDM, it's the charge description master, right? Yeah.
And I mean, well, if you just talk to anybody who's ever went to a dentist or a doctor and said, hey, I don't have insurance, what's your prices? You realize, oh crap, you could do this way cheaper because you're only charging me this if I don't have insurance, and if I do have insurance, you're that's going up 100%. And of course that cost ends up coming down on us because the doctor or the dentist will charge the insurance more, and then the insurance has to make up for that cost, so they'll charge us more, so we end up getting screwed regardless. So it's yeah, I mean, I think the problem with the healthcare system being a for-profit industry is that that becomes the concern. I mean, there's going to be people who are going to look at how do we make maximum profit. I mean, you even look at, and you know, again, this is, I don't know if this is me being conspiratorial and me just always
Right.
questioning things, but I feel like more often than not, they find reasons to keep you in the hospital longer. They find reasons to push surgery on you. They, you know, everybody has some specialist they want to send you to that they work with, which you have to assume that's some type of relationship that they benefit from. I mean, if you know, the doctor says, hey, go to the I mean, here's an example. Like, my mother had a back surgery, and she doesn't speak any English, so I'd have to go translate for her. And they had her come do a checkup every week, and every week we would show up, and we'd, you know, it'd be an inconvenience because we have to go downtown Springfield, a lot of traffic in the middle of the day. I ended up having to take time off from work, go down there, and we'd wait there. We'd see the doctor. Oh, how's your back? She says it's fine. You know, no pain. You know, she seems like she's doing well. Oh, okay, great. Okay, I'll see you next week. And it's just like, I mean, maybe that's a little shorter than the conversation was, but it was not much longer than that. And then finally, I'm like, listen, how about if she has any pain or any issues whatsoever, then I schedule an appointment, because this seems ridiculous. You know, just coming every week just so you could charge her insurance. And that's the way I was looking at it. I'm like, they're just justifying charging our insurance. This is the easiest buck he's making. We're showing up for 2 seconds. He's asking a handful of questions. We leave, and then we do the same thing again. And it's almost like, let's try to fit in as many patients as we can in a day. And then really, how much information can you really get from a patient anyways, with how quickly these interactions are? And I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's something more than, you know, just coincidentally, people are always pushed to go down the road of, you need surgery, you should go get surgery, you should get. I mean, there's a lot of profit in surgery, right? I mean, doesn't that kind of make sense?
Well, it's the 80-20 rule. So 80% of surgery pays for, actually 20% of surgery pays for 80% of the hospital costs, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's what they say. So, you know, there are all sorts of different types of billing, and I can go into this as well. So there's professional billing, which is what your doctor charges you for the service they do. And then there's hospital billing for when you're staying in the hospital. So when you talk about how it seems like the doctors always want you to go to the hospitals, that's where it gets into a bit of the kickback statutes. And the government is trying to do something with making sure that they are tracking fraud much more carefully. But this is where I was beginning to send emails to FFO. I said, is it possible that all of this is not known to the government, or is it possible that the government knows this and then just allows it to go on because it's a machine and it's too big to stop? And there's the question. There's the question. I don't understand, because those bills that were being sent, you know, they're claims. That's what that's called. So there's an account record, and the claims are dropped onto the account record. And all of the documentation has to match that claim. So it can be a CPT code or an ICD-10 diagnosis. It has to be very specific, and a lot of times the claims are denied. So that somehow led to a practice of called that it's upcharging or upbilling, where things are going on to the patient's chart as having been performed, and they were really never done.
Huh.
And the government pays it, and they also are incentivizing whistleblowers to come in and bring their information. But it's difficult to be a whistleblower when you can't find legal representation.
Yeah, and that's one issue you've been having, right? Is just finding somebody who's willing to take on this case or you know, your story.
Right. So I have 3 large systems that I've worked with that I could easily whistleblow on, but it's so big that people don't even want to take it on. So I just wait and I think, okay.
Oh, I've heard her name. I can't think of her name right now, but remember the attorney that worked with a bunch of whistleblowers, Thomas Drake, Snowden. What's her name? I can't think of her.
If I'm being honest, I'm really trying to find. Do you remember? There's a website that is. It's almost like YouTube. I think it's on YouTube, and it's Andy Breaks Whatever. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm trying to find that because it has a really good explanation for what you were just talking about. Fraudulent billing, things that are happening, ways that they bilk the system so that they can do the maximum charge for maximum reimbursement within the healthcare system. There's some sort of comedy person, YouTube-ish person who breaks things or tells you about things so that, things that you thought were mysterious, he breaks it down such that even the general public can understand. I just can't remember what it was. And I may have to just look at YouTube to understand it, but yeah. I know I'm not as fluent in describing these things, but I think what I found is over the years, just lots of episodes of doctors and administrators who, for the better good of overall health, they've just had to turn a blind eye to errors that should be reported so that transparency can be brought about and everyone can learn and it can make the whole system better. And that's what you were saying. You were saying, how could it be that people are just not being careful? Well, I don't know. But as long as we keep things under the rug, it's never going to get better.
Now, the attorney I was referring to is Jesslyn Raddick. She was the attorney for, I believe, a couple of people that have been on my show, John Kiriakou, Thomas Drake, and I think she worked with Snowden also. But there's a great documentary called Silenced, and it's she's in it, and so is Thomas Drake and John Kiriakou, and I forget who else's story they kind of follow in that. But she's big into human rights and a defense attorney for whistleblowers, and she's a journalist and really interesting person. Maybe that's somebody that you might want to look into. But so
absolutely,
yeah, because she specializes in this type of stuff, and it seems like she doesn't shy away from serious, bigger stories, and she's willing to go to bat for people.
Well, I'll have to take that name down.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
So, it's I don't even know what road to go down because there's so many things we could talk about. Do you think? I mean, what's your opinion? So, how do you fix this? Do you think something like a universal healthcare system would be better? Would it be worse? I mean, you kind of have been in the inside. I'm kind of from the outside looking in. You're in the inside looking out. I mean, what's your opinion for somebody who's worked so closely with the healthcare system? Do you? I mean, what's your opinions on it? Do you think it would work? Do you think it works in certain European countries, but it wouldn't work here? I mean, what's the pros and cons of it? Would it fix this? The problems you have seen?
Trying to remember. I've got a statistic that I've saved. And I'm glad I saved it so I can sound like I'm very, very knowledgeable. But hang on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm there. There's such a wealth of information that comes across your desk every day that it's just hard to keep up with everything. So hang on.
Yeah, no problem.
Note. Okay, here we go. We've created a system in which 1.5 million people work in the health insurance industry, while barely half as many doctors provide the actual care. And all those high-tech advances, pacemakers, MRIs, 3D mammograms, have produced an ironically upside-down healthcare marketplace. It's the only industry in which technological advances have increased costs instead of lowering them. So that's just a snip. It's a little snip of an article that was in Time by someone named Stephen Brill. And he is a healthcare inflation cost whistleblower. He is all about talking about how unfair it is to charge so much money for healthcare until he was experiencing back pain and went into the hospital. He went in to see his regular doctor, and the regular doctor just thought something was amiss and sent him for an MRI, and it showed that he had an ascending abdominal aortic aneurysm, or maybe it was a aortic arch aneurysm, which is much more deadly, meaning he had literally a ticking time bomb in his chest. He was rushed to the hospital, but overnight, while he was waiting to go for his surgery, he had a nightmare where the CEO of the hospital came to him and said, "Hey, we think you're here doing a expose. We're going to transfer you to another hospital where there was a lesser surgeon." And he's begging, "Please let me stay here." And thankfully it was a dream. And he went and he had his surgery and he lived. But he said it was so painful. What he learned after having that surgery is he would pay $77 for a box of gauze forever just to stay alive. When it comes to healthcare and you're looking at your family members and it's the difference between you living and dying, it doesn't matter how much it costs. You'll pay whatever it costs because it's that urgent. But it shouldn't have to be that way. So he outlined several steps that we could take as a country to basically level the playing field. So like what you're talking about, when you go to 5 different hospitals that are all in the same town and you have such a variety of how much the procedure costs and not much of a variety in what the outcome is, that seems odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, they're kind of taking advantage of the fact that people don't shop around. I mean, it's not like I go, if I need back surgery or if I need knee surgery or whatever, I mean, I get recommended somebody. Maybe I go to that person because I get recommended to them, or it's just the closest hospital or the closest place. And it's not like I go shop around and go to, 5, 6 different, hospitals and clinics and figure out what's my cheap, especially if the insurance is covering it. That's the other thing. If the insurance is covering it, then I'm really not looking at the cost, so it's it's just one of those things where I feel like they can take advantage of people.
It's very true, and I don't know exactly how we address this, but I do have ideas for what I feel like should be our direction. And one of them is, I've said this often, I've said that we need to have our healthcare and how we treat ourselves and our bodies is our currency. So I feel like if I'm an individual who has diabetes and I'm eating the right diet and I'm doing the right exercise and I'm staying away from the things I need to stay away from, I should be getting better care, or at least more affordable care, than, say, someone who is not doing the same steps. So I know it's an uncomfortable subject, but I do believe the way that we care for ourselves should be our currency. And in some form and fashion, that's happening. So now you have to submit to whatever yearly test so that if your deductible, well, your monthly premiums, you have to pay a surcharge if you're a smoker, or whatever it is, whatever the measure is. So at my last company, it was if you're a smoker, if your BMI is above a certain amount, and there was, they do a blood test to make sure that you have your cholesterol in check or whatever, or at least that you're working towards a healthy life, right? And then they have smoking cessation programs that if you participate in, they will grant you the waiver. So we're going that direction anyway. But I just feel like if we're being honest in this country, so let's say you want to buy a big, huge house. Well, guess what? You need to have the right credit score, right? You don't just get it because you want it.
Yeah, but there's even issues with that, because you go to a doctor, they're still giving you nutritional science information or nutritional advice that is super old and completely been debunked. And I mean, that goes back to I think we talked about before recording, just the crisis with science and how even some of the science that doctors are using, it's so much of it's manipulated. And
well, okay, so let me just ask, have you ever watched Forks Over Knives?
Yes, but it's been a long time.
Right. So in that, they conclusively proved that whole food, plant-based diets will result in the best amount of health and the least amount of disease in the American diet. Yeah. And that's not saying that you can't have meat, but the balance of how much meat you eat, and also it needs to be tailored. One diet is not right for every individual.
Yeah, I mean,
So in my body, I thought it'd be great to eat meat and do the keto diet, but that didn't result in a great result for me because I'm hyperlipidemia. I have hypercholesterolemia and hyperlipidemia, meaning bacon that I eat converts itself to fat that then causes me to have high cholesterol. So my body prefers avocado as a fat, a plant-based fat.
Yeah, but that goes to another interesting conversation. The debate about cholesterol and if it's harmful or not, or if, I mean, there's a lot of just, studies now talking about how dietary cholesterol has, very little effect on your actual cholesterol levels. And even if in the cases where it does, is it even harmful? So in other words, if you're a healthy person and you have no other issues, but your cholesterol levels are high according to what your doctor says they should be, then most people are completely fine. I mean, for example, my father, and this goes back to just, I guess, knowing a little bit about my parents' health because I have to go translate for them. When I was a kid, I remember going to translate for my father, and my doctor telling my father that he had the highest cholesterol out of all hundreds of his patients, that he had by far the highest cholesterol. I remember when I heard the cholesterol, can't remember recall the exact number, but I remember when I first heard it, I thought it was his credit score. It was that high, and and so that kind of planted the seed of doubt if there were, how crucial cholesterol was, because what was happening was that they told me that his cholesterol levels were the highest out of everybody. He was far beyond what a lot of other people that were much lower, that supposedly were in the risk area, that they're at a point where, you should be taking some type of cholesterol prescription drug. And yet he's way higher than that standard that they're looking for. And yet he's completely fine, healthy, full of energy. He works like, I mean, my parents are farmers. They work outside.
Right.
They I mean, just nonstop. And but yet he had this high cholesterol. So as a kid, I was trying to convince my father that he should change his diet, because I'm like, Dad, it just sounds serious. He's saying it's so high, this and that. And it was hard to get through to him because he's like, I feel fine, and I don't know why, I don't think that it's something to be concerned about. And as time went by, I'm like, wait, he's not, according to what the doctor's saying, I mean, he should have croaked years ago, and he's still alive.
But are we comparing apples to apples here? So this is why you have to set up really good randomized control trials. Trials where people need to get a drug and they don't get it. And then people who don't need to get the drug don't get it. You have to set up a parameter. So your parents were not the norm of what was going on while most of the world was going into the fast food, craze of.
That's true.
So it's hard. They talk about blue areas. You've heard of that, right?
Where people live
populations all seem to live long and live well. And they're clustered, but they don't always look at, the food is just one element. So one of my projects that I would like to do, and you may help me decide this right now. So I'm at a point in my life where it's time for me to make the next jump. I'm either going to get my PhD in public health, or I would like to get my executive MBA so that I can put some of these ideas into practice, build the right network and make sure that I leave a legacy that I can be proud of, right? So public health route, I would go and I would try and develop a quality of life tool that can be used on mass populations, right? So instead of using quality of life tools right now, and just to let you know, every study is based on nominal ordinal interval ratio. Those are levels of measurement. Unfortunately, in America and in science, the reason why you say so many things are just quoted incorrectly, it's because we use non-parametric tools to measure parametric data, or parametric tools to measure non-parametric data. So parameters, measurement, levels of measurement, all of those things are translated well in your PhD. But unfortunately, MDs don't tend to use that level of measurement and that level of detail in breaking down the studies that they use to base their practice on. So what you're saying right now is my dad had this cholesterol that was through the roof, looked like his credit score, but he's incredibly healthy and incredibly functional. Well, I'm guessing that he has several other parameters that made him very healthy. And one of them is, are he and your mom very happy?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Huh. Well, okay.
I mean,
He had a life partner, right?
yes. Well,
Okay.
yeah, with having community, having a stable
Right.
family. I mean, that's a huge. I mean, I've just did a. I mean, I've done podcasts with what's his name, Johan Hari, who wrote Lost
Sure.
Connections, and talked about the history of depression, anxiety, and what really causes these things, addiction, and a big part of it is a lack of community. It's unhappiness, and then you end up self-medicating with substances, drugs, stuff like that, and how important it is to have
To have connection.
yeah, connection. Absolutely.
All I'm saying is it's hard to level the playing field to understand which studies are valid when we have so many different ways of studying subjects. Really, it's very hard to understand. Basic science, translational science, and putting it into clinical medicine, it's very confusing. And it seems like there are many. So in Forks Over Knives, I learned that the USDA was basically, a puppet for lobbyists who, they should have never been allowed to sit on scientific boards, but they were. And that's where they pushed the whole food pyramid, which really was not the right pyramid to push.
No, I mean you're pushing carbs and breads and
Yeah.
pastas and things that aren't nutritionally dense at all. It's just flour. It's just cheap.
Well, not whole food. So I can get behind bread, but it needs to be whole food, right?
See, this is where we're gonna disagree a little bit. I think
Absolutely.
this is the thing. I wish I had. If I was prepared, I'd look. They're talking about lobbying and all this stuff. There is. Let's see if I can find an article on it. But if you look at the history, who pushed cholesterol levels and pushed this concern about cholesterol and fats. I mean, you can find the research that they used to kind of come up with these suggestions that this is how high your cholesterol level should be and all this stuff, and it's all based on really bad, poor research, and a lot of it was pushed by food companies and like you said, lobbyists and stuff like that. And you can actually see it, and you're seeing it over and over again now with people who are doing stuff like the carnivore diet, the paleo diet, the ketogenic diet, and their cholesterol levels are going up, but yet they're healthier. And I think cholesterol is a much more complicated topic. I mean, if you hear like somebody like Dr. Chris Kresher or Dr. Rhonda Patrick kind of talk about cholesterol, a lot of times it'll make your head explode because you realize how complicated it really is. It's not just as simple as good cholesterol and bad cholesterol and
Right.
and stuff like that. It's a hormone. It's a necessary hormone. I mean, there's a lot of different factors and things from thyroid to a lot of different things could affect your cholesterol levels. And but I mean, I definitely agree with you that counting on what your ancestors, what part of the world they're from, how active you are, your lifestyle, it can affect what you can or cannot eat. But one thing we do know for sure is, your body can run off fat for energy. I mean, you look at anthropologists, you look at the way people used to eat. I mean, we used to go long periods of time without eating. You didn't have access to as many grains and fruits and stuff like that like we do now. I think at some point we kind of started pushing grains and eating more grains because we didn't understand that we were trying to figure out how to get full. We didn't really think about like what's nutritionally dense or what happens to that food once we digest it. I mean, my
Right,
mother.
but didn't they die at 40? I mean, our ancestors.
Well, that's actually a little deceiving too, because I've talked to Dr. Chris Ryan, who studies our primitive ancestors and the anthropologists, and he talks about how actually the life expectancy, if you take away infant mortality, it almost hasn't changed. And what was happening is that they were basically using infant mortality in that average lifespan, and babies that were alive for just a little bit and dying, and just using all these other numbers into that. But if you look at how long they were living after that, that basically really hasn't changed much. So it's a little deceiving, the average life expectancy. But with that said, we're also, even if we want to ignore that, and of course that's, I'm sure there's probably people who disagree with that or whatnot, or have conflicting information. But if you ignore that, a lot of people are saying that for the first time in history, that people are going to live less, not as long as their parents, and that life expectancy can actually go down. And if you look at people like Gary Taubes, who wrote The Case Against Sugar, and you look at the documentary Sugar Coated, which really goes into the history of how the sugar industry basically demonized fats and cholesterol, and then that's when everybody, and pushed all this low-fat milk, low-fat sour cream, low-fat, all this stuff, and then basically on food and on everything you bought, it gave you a daily value percentage for protein and all this stuff, but it gave you no daily value for sugar because they wanted you to basically ignore it, to just look past it and just think that it's an empty calorie. It has no effect on your health, it has no negative effect on you. But obviously, you look as diabetes increases, you look at arthritis. There's so many issues caused by insulin levels and glucose in your blood. I mean, it just we are designed to run off fats and glucose. We can run off both. And for example, I do the ketogenic diet. I can go 24 hours without eating, no problem. I could never do that before when I was intaking carbs, because I'm assuming my blood sugar would go down and then I'd get hungry. Now I'm running off fats for energy, and I can go long periods of time without eating when I'm in ketosis. And you can easily check that too by a bunch of different ways. But if there's ketones in your system, you're in ketosis, you actually feel sharp, you feel energetic, and you aren't a slave to hunger and constantly eating. And and you look at certain places in the world where vegetables and fruits aren't, it's either really cold and they're not that available, or they're expensive. People live off fatty fish and meat or whatever. And again, and I think that it's not one size fits all. I think the problem with nutrition is that it becomes very cultish. It becomes very, very much like religion, where people are like, join my religion, come join my church, I have the answers, and I don't think it is one size fits all. But I also think that you can, regardless if you're into the paleo diet or the keto diet or vegan diet or any of the stuff, everybody kind of does have a little bit of a agenda and pushes one thing or another. But there's so much bad science and out there that people can kind of pick and choose. Because even a lot of I got offered to have on the guys who did a Cowspiracy, and then they also did a What the Health. And I know they were on the Joe Rogan podcast soon after they contacted me on being on. And I'm like, honestly, I can't have you guys on because I don't agree with your information. I think some of it's incorrect, and I would hate to have them on and just have a 1 hour debate,
arguing.
Yeah, and I think that their hearts are in the right place, but I think a lot of these studies that show, people who eat meat have this issue. People who eat, it's like, well, they're not telling you what else they're eating. They're not telling you that they're eating, they're not eating grass-fed meat, that they're eating, a hamburger from not a grass-fed burger, but they're having one from McDonald's or Burger King or whatever. Like, there's so many different things that come into play that can affect these studies, and so many different little details that could be manipulated or could be left out, or that most science, and like I think we talked about prior to recording. I mean, and I wish I had the number in front of me, but James Corbett, who's a frequent guest on my show, he did a great little video, a little short documentary called The Crisis of Science, and it had a number in there on how many studies can't be recreated. And it's insane. It just shows you how poor the science is. And then you go into the issue of, okay, now who's funding this science? Who's pushing the science? I mean, look at the FDA and Big Pharma. I mean, most people who are somewhat open-minded and knowledgeable understand that there's, they're both helping each other out, and that, the FDA doesn't do any Big Pharma studies. If Merck or Pfizer or whatever wants to get something FDA approved, they do their own studies, and they don't have any. There's no law that exists to force them to share any studies that show that their product's unsafe. Only the ones that show that it is safe. And that's why you get these cases where 6 months later or a year later, you see these attorneys on TV telling you that, oh, if you have a loved one who dies from this drug, give us a call. It's like, wait. I thought the whole point of it being FDA approved is so this stuff doesn't happen, that we aren't the guinea pigs where you throw the stuff on the market. People lose loved ones, people get sick, get hurt, whatever, and then we find out it's unsafe. Like, you're supposed to figure that out prior. So there's a lot of, and this is why this issue is so important. That's why I think food, healthcare, pharmaceutical drugs, nutrition, all these things are intertwined, because unfortunately all of it's kind of motivated by the same thing, profit. Who's profiting and why, or bad science. I mean, there's just so much bad science in all this stuff, and sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally, sometimes it's just as simple as
it's mind-boggling, or it goes in waves.
Yeah.
Or it depends on your personal story, right? So you had a hook because you heard your dad's testimony that he was on the way out because of his cholesterol. But then you have a personal story behind it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, I can't even remember how many years ago it was when. I must have been. I mean, it must have been like 15 years ago, probably, when they're telling me that my dad's, he can't continue this way, or he's gonna have a heart attack. And then, but this is the other thing, right? And another thing that made me kind of skeptical about the whole, about just the whole system is, I told him, like, listen, my dad, we're Portuguese. My dad makes wine. He's not a heavy drinker, but every night he has a glass of wine or a couple glasses of wine. He, sometimes he has espresso with some cognac or brandy with it. He, he drinks just about, every day. And I know that Lipitor, and what he was on at the time, is toxic to the liver. And I'm like, hey, the cholesterol doesn't seem to hurt him, but I'm a little concerned about this Lipitor hurting him, and because he does drink every day, and you're never going to get him to stop drinking, and it just is that a concern? Oh, this is exactly what the doctor told me. Oh, the heart attack will kill him before his liver does. And I'm like, oh, that's reassuring. It's just it just one of the...
How we can be so cavalier about this stuff. Well, I will tell you one thing, Ricky. Here's something I learned. So this time last year, I had been fired from my job. I was promoted, but not because I was getting promoted. The people above me kept quitting because the reckoning was coming. I was in a large healthcare system, and there were things that were being discovered, and I like to say it as I was showing them dirty laundry faster than they could wash it. And so we parted ways. They had asked me to slow down. I said, nope, can't do it. Got to speed up. It was patient care, and there were patients, especially vulnerable patients, who were about to be harmed, and I couldn't have that happen. Not on my watch. Not if I could prevent it. And so we parted ways, and I was very disappointed because I had really invested in that organization, right? Knew a lot of people, felt really good, felt like I'd finally made it to my place home. But I was fired, and so I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I had the greatest man I've ever met in my life. And I thought, you know what? It'll be okay because I have a person in my life that I love. And last April 4th, he passed away. He was 34 years old.
Oh, my age.
It was devastating. I mean, he's the most alive person anyone's ever met. And I had to go on this journey that I've never been on. And so while I had planned on having my own corporation, and by this time I wanted to have consulting moneyballed, so I was basically printing $50 bills and blowing my nose in $20 bills, I had to slow my life down significantly because I became depressed and I had complicated grief. And all my life I've never taken medication because I said, who needs medicine? I can go run a marathon. I'll be fine. But my tennis shoes were laughing at me in the corner. So this system that I'm talking about, the one that's broken and full of fraud, if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be here still because I was so gravely depressed. And it was a culmination. It's not just one thing. It was that it was time for me to deal with all the adult issues I've been pushing under the surface. And so I say, because my sweetheart was a pharmacist, I say he's up in heaven laughing because I have to take medication now. It's taken me a long time to find the light that I want to go to, because it was a very low time for me. And it also made me realize that what my therapist says is when really bad things happen, you get to meet really good people. So that's the silver lining for me. And I am very hopeful that in healthcare, when we show the darkness, we will get to see the good people rise to the cream of the crop. That's my goal. My goal is we get a whole bunch of smart people in a room and we have people working in systems, because, you go to Canada, there's problems. You go to France, there's problems. Everywhere there's problems. But I would hope that we could build on the systems that have begun to work well to support the healthcare industry. But massive greed is not good. I know that. So I don't know the answer, but I know that I'm still, even though I was ready to say there's no need for the type of medications we have, and the insurance company is, all insurance companies are greedy, horrible people. If I didn't have the great healthcare that I've been able to obtain here, I don't know if I'd still be on this earth.
Yeah. So do you feel like kind of being a whistleblower and exposing this has kind of given you a purpose when you needed one the most?
Probably.
Yeah, that's depression and anxiety. I mean, so are you on something for depression, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh yeah. No, I'm great.
And
I'm on something for depression, which is Prestige. And we recently had to go up on the dosage. And in the evenings, I take something to help me sleep. I was having night terrors from PTSD and other things. And I have a medicine called Prazosin that helps me sleep through the night. Yep. And I've never taken meds ever. And I've had a very,
and it seems,
it's not fun learning that 2 transplant patients expired because somebody wasn't checking the right boxes. I've had a very traumatic filled life, but I'm very thankful that I have a toolbox now that I can use to kind of help me suss out when it's time to call to get more help. And also, use groups and meetings and safe people, seek out safe people to be helped.
And you find that antidepressant medication helps?
Yep. I do.
Yeah,
I do.
I have I've heard conflicting stories. I've heard, obviously there's a huge issue with the DSM and just not really being that scientific. And, a lot of, unfortunately, sometimes people are just going through some life stuff. And, like you did with your losing your loved one, your significant other, it just, is it chronic? Is it just one of those hurdles that, those life struggles that we go through? Is it something that, it's just, it's very interesting because.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think as a clinician and as a nurse who has to recognize signs and symptoms, what I noticed is that I kept increasing my activity so that I could do what I'd normally do to get out of a funk, is what I'd call it. But the things that I had done before that helped me get out of a funk, they weren't helping me this time. All my usual coping mechanisms were not adequate. And what I found is I was saying things that I don't normally say. And that's one of the hallmarks. So something we don't like talking about, and this is another segue, is suicide. And recently I read an article that says people who have loved ones or family members or friends that have committed suicide, they would prefer us to not say the word commit. Commit means a crime. You've committed a crime, right? And suicide shouldn't be considered a crime. It's an act. So people die by suicide. That's what the loved ones and people who've experienced suicides in their lives would prefer to hear, is what I've read. And people want to talk about the DSM. That's your mental health. So let's say you have a diagnosis of major depression. But guess what? There's also a side that are your emotions, and that's not the same as your mental health. You can be bipolar, but be emotionally healthy because you have a great support system and you're taking your medicine. And you can be mentally well and commit suicide because you don't know how to handle your emotions. So if I tell you one thing that has helped me, it's that emotions and feelings, they're like children in the car. You don't let them drive, but you don't lock them in the trunk. But I needed all of it. I needed medicine, I needed yoga, I needed doctors, I needed nurses, nurse practitioners, grief counselors. I had to bring an army in to make it through this.
Yeah, that's yeah, and everybody requires something different. I mean, they've
Right.
done that, exercise, diet. There's so many different things that can help too. It's just a combination of so many different things. I mean, I guess, the thing about the DSM is it is that, when they use terms like chemical imbalance, it sounds really scientific and it sounds like they know what they're treating, but they really don't. It's like they don't, there's no test. They don't test you for some chemical that is imbalanced. They don't know how imbalanced it is. So the thing, I had a close cousin of mine, my first cousin, Paula, who was dealing with anxiety and depression, and she just became a guinea pig of like, try this and then try that, and then this pill made her a zombie, made her emotionless, and then this pill
Yeah.
didn't help, and it's just like, and I would tell her, I'm like, that's because they're saying it's a chemical imbalance, but they don't know, they didn't test you to see which chemicals imbalanced, and so there's no way of knowing how imbalanced anything is, how to regulate it, or how much of a dosage you should be taking. I mean, you become this guinea pig of try this pill, try that pill, try that, and there's, and I definitely think, you hear stories of people like yourself that it definitely helps and it helped people get through stuff. So I definitely don't want to demonize it and say
No.
that in all cases it's bad. It's not. But I also think that you can't expect the pill to do all the work. Like you mentioned doing yoga, I mean, there's been studies where they show that exercise does as much for depression as some pharmaceutical drugs. And I mean, that's because all pharmaceutical drugs only have to be better than the placebo. So it
Right.
so that that's an issue among itself. But things like exercise, yoga, meditation, appreciating things you have and stop. I mean, we live in a world where we're just constantly wishing we had more material things, or we wanting stuff. Marketing and TV and commercials have completely just controlled our brains into just wanting more stuff, which means that whatever we have, we're not content with. And that's a issue too. So all these things can contribute. I mean, being overworked, eating crappy food. I mean, all this stuff can affect your mood. I mean, we are a chemistry experiment. From how much sleep we have, to our environment, the air we're breathing, the water we're drinking, to a lack of. I had Rebecca Costa on, who's a futurist and scientist, and she talked about the study that humans need on average 6 hours of being social to be at our best, to be sane and happy. And how many people get that? I mean, so very few. And I think this all contributes to being depressed and unhappy, and being less likely to be able to deal with some really depressing stuff, and when we do end up going through it. I mean, there was a story years ago when a bunch of investment bankers or guys that worked in the stock market in London, that were jumping out of bridges, or jumping out of buildings, and committing suicide. And it was just like, how much that had to do with the fact that they were just thinking they were happy because they were making all this money, but they had, like we spoke about, they had no community, they had no friends, they had
Right.
they were just completely obsessed with just and it's kind of been, it's a, what I say, it's like this false American dream. Like you come to America, we're all foreigners, either I'm a foreigner, but everybody here came from some other country, and it's like they came from a country that had community, that had culture, that had dinners together, and they did things together as a community. Everybody helped raise the kids, so you always had this community, and you're around people, and when times got tough, you had people who could help. And so that kind of gave you a sense of security because you knew that you weren't on your own. And then we come to America and we're sold this idea that like, no, be cutthroat, get financially ahead. It's not about making friends. It's about making money. It's all about, doing that. Oh, you don't want to take overtime. You don't want to take this promotion, even though it's going to consume all of your free time and stress you out like crazy. You don't want to take that you should you're don't be lazy, take this promotion. It's like we look down upon people who don't take the OT, the people who don't want to work more hours, don't want to take the job that pays more. It's like, and we don't ever just say, hey, well, for all that stuff there's a price, and sometimes that price is your sanity, your energy. I mean, to be able to come home and have some energy and sanity left to be a good husband, a good wife, a good friend, a good father, mother, whatever it may be, just having better relationships with the people around you. Because we've in America, and and I guess there's probably other countries that are similar, but my experience with growing up here is that we're told that it's like your whole life revolves around trying to make maximum money, and we get so consumed with this goal of making money that we lose everything else that made us happy prior to having money. Because even though you can find people in the Amazon who are completely detached from other civilizations, that you can find them and they look poor, and you look at them and like, oh, they don't have anything. They don't have iPhones. They don't have any of the material stuff we have. But yet there's no signs of anxiety, or there's little signs of unhappiness and depression and all this stuff. And so, I mean, I think we can learn from that. And, I think this is a giant cultural issue, and it's only getting worse when you look at, people just constantly trying to self-medicate with pills and all this stuff. And this goes into what, my personal theory on what I think much of the root cause of addiction is. And, people like Dr. Carl Hart talk about it, and many others, about how a lot of it's, you're self-medicating because there's some internal issues. It's not, we like to blame the substance, but if it's strictly just a substance, if it's because it has addictive properties, then if I do a line of Coke because I'm at a party in college and I never do it again, why does that happen to me? And the friend that I'm with does a line of Coke and becomes an addict, and his whole life is ruined. If it has the same addictive properties, why is it not having the same effect on everybody who does it, or at least similar effects? I think you can kind of dissect, well, I was probably in a happier place. I was a more stable place. So maybe I had a significant other that gave me some happiness. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we're pleasure monkeys. We're constantly searching for pleasure. We listen to music that makes us happy. We exercise because it gives us some satisfaction. We play sports. We do art or whatever it may be that brings you some type of happiness. And if you don't have some source of happiness in your life, and some substance gives you some source of happiness, you're going to keep going to that substance. And so I think I'm sure in a long rant I probably should have found a question to ask you, but do you agree with a lot of what I'm saying, or what's your opinion on that, especially dealing with a lot of having personal experiences dealing with some of the issues we're talking about?
Well, I don't know if this qualifies me or disqualifies me, because I grew up in the South, and I grew up in a Baptist home, Southern Baptist home. And I struggled. I struggled in my youth with really understanding and deciding what I believe my faith is. And so in my faith, I don't have the belief system that what I am most programmed for is to make the most money. But it took me a while to understand what I believe to be true. And my belief system, it has some tenets. And one of them is you should help people, not based on what they can do for you, but just to help them. And I found amazing things that happened in my life when I just focused on others. And one of the benefits of focusing on others is it was such a relief to not worry about myself so much. But I just believe that there are so many questions that we're never going to answer Yeah, I don't know the reason why certain people have addictive personalities and other people do not. And I don't know if many of the things that we treat with medicine today are things that needed not to be treated with medicine a decade ago. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answers. But what I do know is when I'm in the hospital and somebody goes to get that proverbial um, box of cereal, I'm the crime fighter who wants to make sure that when the doctor puts the box of cereal that is an order in, at the other end, the other system receives the right order so that the patient can get the right care. That's what it all comes down to. I want to be a Cape Crusader to make sure that when a patient comes into the hospital, they have the safest experience they can. And we need a few people who aren't scared to stand up and say, hey, guess what? I know you guys are using the emperor's clothes to talk about how safe your system is.
Yeah.
And if that means I don't have a job, well, that's what's going to have to happen. See, I'll be okay working at Starbucks if they'll have me.
It's funny because I was raised a Catholic, and I went to Sunday school and did the whole kabang and First Communion and all that stuff, and I rebelled against it eventually. I end up rebelling because I'm as you can tell, I've always been kind of a curious person who asks a lot of questions, and they didn't like that, and I didn't like the fact that they weren't willing to answer my questions, and there's too many things that didn't make sense. So I felt like I was lied to. So I'm just like, this is all nonsense, and I went the complete opposite direction and became a very, very extreme atheist, where I just like all religion is bullshit. All of it's nonsense. It only does harm in the world. I only looked at examples of it doing harm in the world, and I was like that for a while. And then it got to the point where like I realized a lot of atheists were becoming as extreme as the religious people that I was fighting against. I'm like, oh wait, I left one group to join another group. These people are equally as extremists, and this. I realized that like, okay, maybe let me look at this from a neutral perspective, and I'm like, is there some good? Is there, and then I was trying to be honest with myself, like, okay, you have one side that says religion's always bad, another side that says that religion's necessary and always good. Then let me be neutral about it. And I, as I got older, I appreciated not so much the I didn't care so much about the actual writings and all that type of stuff. But one thing that I did appreciate was the community. When we start talking about these issues that we're talking about, people who are obsessed with making money and material things, and sometimes it's too late by the time they realize they had no real purpose, and that they were just basically lived an unfulfilled life, and they were self-medicating with maybe material things or substances or whatever it may be. And,
yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think religion reminds you, if you go to a church, I mean, how many people can argue with a lot of what stuff that Jesus was preaching? I mean, you really can't. It's just one of those things where just like, yeah, he seems like a pretty good dude, and I kind of agree with them that it's that maybe rich people aren't going to make their way to heaven, and that that you should be good to your neighbors, and all these things, and I'm like,
don't hurt little children. I mean, it's the basics.
Yeah, it is the basics, and I think that some people need to be reminded of those things, because we can get so caught up in this cycle of just going to work, doing your everyday priorities, taking care of your responsibilities, that we forget, like, okay, we need these little reminders. And not just that, and it brings people together. People go. I remember going to church on Sundays. It was the only time my parents used to let me wear like my nice sneakers and my nice clothes. It would be like on Sunday for church, and we'd always dress nice. And you'd see, you'd see your friends, you'd see your relatives, and everybody would talk and hang out. And it gave us a reason to come together. Even if it was just that once a week, we'd come together. And I actually play pickup basketball at one of the places I play ball at was at a evangelical church, and in Springfield. And every time I go there, I mean, they constantly have things going on with the kids. It's like, and the guy who puts basketball together there, he's not even a member at the church. He was just looking for somewhere to put together pickup basketball, and they're like, okay, you want to bring people together for the community? It seems like a good thing. Yeah, why not? And everybody who plays there on the days I play there, none of them are members of the church, but the church feels like they're participating and doing a good thing. They're giving people a place to play, and every time I go there, they have kids playing games, and it just bringing people together. And I think that's super important because if I have friends, Polish friends that are real Catholic, religiously Catholic, and I have Lebanese friends that are Muslim, and you look at there's a lot of subtle differences in things they believe, but the one thing that they all have in common is the importance of family and friends and trying to morally do the right thing. And if religion gives you that, if it gives you some type of guidelines and some reminder, I think it's a pretty good thing. And of course, like in every case, there are people going to use that to justify their something evil they're going to do or some violence or whatever, but for the most part, I think people can use it as just some guidelines to give them some reminder that, hey, you know what, there's more to life than just these material things. There's more to life. Look at things from the big picture. Religion in many cases gets people that forces people to think about the afterlife. What's our purpose? Finding fulfillment in life. I think those are good conversations to have. And even if I don't agree with, their outcome on a lot of these conversations, I think the fact that people are just having those thoughts and looking at things from the big picture is an important thing. And I think there's some absolutely good that comes out of that. So when you tell me that, you're a religious person, I'm not surprised because you have a moral compass, and that probably is a big part of it.
Right. Well, I know that when I met my loved one and we first started dating, he was very wary because as an atheist, he didn't like that I was a Christian.
Yeah.
But by the end, when he passed away, we had planned to start our family, and he decided that he wanted his children raised Catholic just as he was. Because I told him, I said, I don't think you don't like the fact that I'm a Christian. I think you're scared that I'm hyper religious or something. I didn't know. I try and not think for people. That's another skill that I found is very helpful in hospital world. Let people use the part between the nose and the chin. Let them talk. Let them tell you what they want to say. So I've enjoyed talking to you. I feel like we've rambled a lot, and I hope you can use some of this, or maybe we have to talk again. I don't know.
I'm going to use all of it because people who listen to my show are used to long rants, not always, not always mine, but usually mine, my rants. I'll go. But I think people enjoy just hearing real. The truth is, there's a lot of people out there, and I think this is why podcasts have gotten popular, is because there's a lot of people out there who are sick of TV, radio, all these things, having something that they're selling you or trying to sell you a perspective or idea. And when you have open discussions and you have people not just sharing ideas, but willing to have their ideas challenged and challenging ideas, I think that's how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how the human animal has surpassed other animals and become the dominant animals because of our social skills, our ability to share knowledge and work as a community. And I think people like that. I think people like hearing personal stories. It's no different than why people like hearing music that's depressing. You hear that song and you're like, holy shit, like this other person feels the way I feel. This is how
exactly
I feel.
How I felt. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you hear about people, I had this science communicator, Cara Santa Maria, some years ago, and she was on, and she was very outspoken about her depression. And I spoke about it was the first time on the podcast I talked about my personal experience with depression and growing up and dealing with it. And I loved the fact that she was open to talk about every aspect of it and go into detail, because I know there's people who listen to that show who listen, and are going to listen to this one and listen to your personal story, and they're going to get something out of it, and they're going to feel like they're not alone. There's other people who are dealing with the same thing. So I think there's tons of benefit in it, and there's also just a sense of being able to put your guard down when you listen to a interview or podcast or conversation, and it sounds like two people just having a conversation. Like it could be, any of these people listening, that this conversation could be similar to any conversation they have with a loved one or a friend or whatnot. So it just it's not scripted, it's not it's not sugar coated, it's just two people actually talking, and I think people really enjoy that.
Well, I'm glad to participate. And it was really great talking
Yeah, same
and
here.
chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll definitely contact you after after the show, and I'll send you the podcast before I put it up, and let you listen to it or whatnot, and then hopefully we talk again in the near future. Hopefully you can get an attorney to work with you. I'll
Make
send.
some progress.
Yeah, and
Woo.
make some progress. And you ever thought about writing a book or anything like that, or?
Yes, FFO is helping me steer in that direction.
Great, awesome.
Yes.
Well, FFO is another great guy who I'm super glad I got to meet him, and he's I love the fact that he's willing to go out of his way to help people out, and if anybody hasn't watched. I can't even. I almost slipped. I can't tell you
Yep.
anything about him because
Right.
it'll give
Right.
out some stuff. But if people who are listening, if you end up knowing what we know about him, you realize he's a great guy because he's made like many whistleblowers, he made some serious sacrifices to get the truth out and put his career and in some cases his life on the line to do what's right. And that's why I think I have such a great appreciation for whistleblowers. And anytime there's any whistleblowers that want to come on this podcast, I say go ahead, contact me. I'll be more than happy to have you on and share your story, because I think it's a lot of times whistleblowers are looking for somewhere to talk, somebody who is willing to listen. And the nice thing about me is that I don't have any sponsors. I have a family-owned business, so I can't get fired. So I'm not too worried about pissing off anybody. So I kind of have the benefit of those things. So, but thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate the conversation. It was a real blast, and really hats off to what you're doing. Like I said, I have tons of respect for people like yourself who are willing to do what's morally right, even though I'm sure you will say that it's much easier to do the morally right thing than try to sleep at night knowing you didn't, right?
I'm just not designed that way, so I just, it doesn't compute. It does not compute, and I am thankful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always wonder how people who do somewhat morally bad things, how they can just look in the mirror and sleep with themselves, because I have this thing called guilt, and it's kind of been my best friend, because it's makes sure that I eat right and I exercise and I'm good to people, and when I'm not good to people that I feel bad about it, to make sure I correct that. And so I don't always.
It's your conscience, so
yeah.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, well, be well, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch. Enjoy the rest of your night, and we'll definitely stay connected.
Okay, thanks so much, Ricky. Bye.
Hey, thank you. Take care.
Believe in the ripple effect.